Let's go back and review the concept of citizenship in ancient Athens, because I think this is an area that we need to go back to and review just to make sure that we're very clear on it. So we're going to talk about citizenship, who was included in citizenship and who wasn't. And just before we start, let's remember that citizenship in ancient Athens was broken into three categories. So there were three groups of people in ancient Athens, and only one of those groups actually had all the rights of full citizens. So, who were citizens? Well, the first thing to know is that they were the only members of the society who could vote and take part in the government in ancient Athens. And that is not all that different from most modern democracies, including Canada. For example, in Canada, in order to have the right to vote, you must be a citizen. And the same is true for running for public office or for a government job. You have to be a citizen in order to be able to run for that job. The thing that's different between ancient Athens and most modern day democracies is that citizenship was limited to one class of society or a small group of people. And most modern democracies do not limit their citizenship as much as was done in ancient Athens. For example, if you move to Canada from another country, after a certain period of time, you can apply to become a citizen, and it's most likely that you will become a citizen. That was not the case in ancient Athens. If you were not born in Athens to a citizen, you had no hope of becoming a citizen yourself. Okay, so obviously these citizens were very proud of their position, and they were actually at the very top of the social structure. If you think of it like a pyramid or a triangle, the citizens were at the very top. The next group of people in ancient Athens were called metics. And metics were people who lived in Athens but had not been born there. So they were born outside of the city state of Athens. And they were not citizens because they were not born in Athens. They were not allowed to own land and they were not allowed to become citizens. So that's very different from our modern democracy in Canada, where you have the opportunity to become a citizen if you come to Canada from another place. And the very bottom group on that pyramid in ancient Athens was the slaves. And slaves were people that were owned by other people. In Athens, slaves were either owned by private Athenians, so citizens, or they were actually owned by the city-state of Athens itself. Many slaves were people who had been taken prisoner when their own city state was attacked by the Athenians. So maybe they were from one of the other Greek city states, and after their city state was attacked and defeated by the Athenians, they were captured and brought to Athens to be slaves. And like metics, slaves could not become citizens. They had even less of a chance of becoming citizens than metics did. So those are the three groups or classes in Athenian society. At the very top, the citizens. To be a citizen, you had to have been born in Athens, and your parents must have been citizens as well. The middle group is the metics, and they were people who were not born in Athens or whose parents were not born in Athens. They weren't allowed to own any property and they weren't allowed to take part in democracy, but they were free. They weren't owned. The very bottom group in the society was the slaves, and they were owned either by private Athenians or by the city-state of Athens itself. And if you remember the metaphor of the pyramid or the triangle, the largest parts are at the bottom. So there were more slaves than medics, and there were more medics than citizens. So citizens were the smallest group of people. And some estimates suggest that only 10 or 20% of all the people living in Athens were actually citizens with all the rights of citizens. The other 80 to 90% were people who did not have the rights of citizens. In addition to those three classes, the roles of men and women were very different in ancient Athenian society. And most of the time, when we think about ancient Athens, and if we think about it as a place that had great literature and theater and philosophy and learning and knowledge and democracy. We are only thinking about what life would have been like for a citizen and a man citizen. Women citizens did not have the same rights. So men in ancient Athens, men citizens spent most of their day outside the home, hanging out with other men. They worked, they shopped at the Agora, which was the big open marketplace in the center of Athens. They talked about politics and they voted because they were spending time in the assembly as well. Sports were still an important part of their lives. They participated in a lot of sports when they were young in their school, and sports continued to be important in their lives as adults. Men also enjoyed entertaining friends in their homes. So they would have these big, elaborate parties where they would lie on couches and then have the slaves serve them food and wine. And you may have seen this kind of thing in movies or TV shows. Women, on the other hand, women citizens, basically stayed in their homes all the time. Their lives were completely focused on the home. Girls did not go to school like boys did. They were educated by their mothers. Most girls didn't learn how to read and write, but some of them would have been taught to read and write. Mostly, though, what they learned was the things that they would need to know to manage a household. They learned how to spin and weave to make cloth, and that was something that was seen as a very, very important role of women in ancient Athens, was spinning wool and weaving cloth and making clothing for their family. So they spun, they wove, and they took care of children. And those are the skills that girls would need as adult women. So that's what they learned at home from their mothers. Now, wealthy families, citizens, had slaves to do the housework. So slaves would take care of getting water from the well and doing the cooking and cleaning stuff up. But no matter how many slaves they had, the women always wove the cloth for their families' clothes, even the most wealthy of all citizens. Speaking of wealthy women, they almost never went out in public except for family celebrations and certain religious ceremonies, particularly funerals. And there is an old joke about Athenian women, high class women, who were only ever allowed to leave the home for funerals. So a much, much different life for women citizens in ancient Athens than for men.